My father had a cardiac event that reduced him down to 30% of his heart. So I only live a mile and a half up the road. So I was here all the time. My sister's in Victoria, my brother's in outside of Quebec, and they were here, but then they had to go back to their families, and I remained here. In October, my father was at the hospital. That was just to check his medications, and they wanted to keep him overnight. Quite a traumatic event that happened there in terms of my father's reaction to being in the hospital. The doctor had told me, what are his end-of-life wishes. I really needed to decompress, so I walked away for about 15 minutes. When I came back, my father was pulling all his EKG markers off, and I thought he was just confused. I'm like, Dad, we're waiting to get you admitted. He was like, no. And then in a clear moment, he just turned to me and went, what life is this here? And so he wanted to go home. That was abundantly clear.
Welcome back to the Dementia Collective. Today we have the pleasure of being joined by Varsha Bhat. Varsha, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here, Andrew. Appreciate the time.
Of course. So we always get started with a Patreon question where loyal members of the village are able to ask a question to you. So this is the question I have for you. Ready?
Sure.
All right. So aging with dignity is a great idea, but sometimes it is hard. What suggestions do you have to help caregivers ensure that they are caring with dignity for their loved one?
Listen to them. That's the biggest one I could say. Listen to the loved one. Ask questions. Our system is so fragmented that we don't necessarily get the attention that we need from within the system. But at least as a caregiver, since that's the context of the question, really listen to what does a loved one want? What is dignified to them? There's a lot of cultural implications here as well, right? So if eating vegetarian food is important, continue that through their decline. Find moments of connection with them where you can continue to build positive memories. Because from everything I've seen and heard, our loved ones, of course, they need the caring, but they want the time. They want that love with the people they want to be around. So that would be my quick answer to that.
Let's qualify this a little bit. How are you defining dignity?
It's a great question. Everyone defines it differently. When you mentioned aging with dignity, and that's actually the name of the podcast that I started, but a lot of people said, well, why wouldn't you say aging gracefully? Um, Not everyone ages gracefully. We all know people that are not graceful as they age. But I do feel in this country, we have the right to a dignified aging process. What does that look like? Depends on person to person, right? It's not necessarily about the building that we're living in. It's probably more about the communication that we have with each other. I mentioned vegetarian, it could be the food, it could be all sorts of things, but what is dignified to each person is very different. We can apply standards from a Canadian context that talks about, a certain standard of living, but it goes so much more beyond that. So that's why I said my first answer was listen. Listen into what does your loved one want.
How would you navigate it then if it's one of those instances, where they're nonverbal? How would you navigate that? Because let's sort of give a circumstance here that somebody is, we hire a companion care or home care company to look after our loved one, and that loved one is nonverbal, and they can't communicate what they consider dignity. And we're hiring this organization that may not necessarily understand the foundational pieces that make up our loved one. How would you suggest navigating that unique circumstance? Because it's ever present,
Yeah.
right?
So the first one is to the caregivers that are out there, have the conversation early, before they get to a point where they're nonverbal, if you can. I was in this situation with my mom, right, where she was verbal and she started losing her words, and we never anticipated how far it was going to go. And then we had the issue with my father. So I did not get to ask mom the hard questions. So if you have that opportunity before it becomes a crisis, have that conversation as soon as possible. What are the potential scenarios for whatever diagnosis you've got, and how do you want to be treated in that situation? If you're entering into a situation, as you've described, the scenario where somebody is nonverbal, talk to the family. Does the family have a good understanding of what that person considers dignified? Um, I know of a couple of situations where a senior male member of was being bathed and was nonverbal, and every day, the Monday that he was being bathed, there was chaos in the residence. There was anger, the person was very violent. Um, After talking to the family, which took them weeks to mention this, that, there's a problem here, that your father, every time we bathe him, or every Monday, he's always agitated and angry. And what they found out was it was a female care provider that was doing all the hygiene cleanse in the back, and the man was very disturbed by that. So as soon as they talked to the family, they realized, oh, this is what it is. He's very uncomfortable with that. Can we get a female care provider? So if you can't talk to the loved one before they lose all capacity to speak to the family. If you can't get any information from the family, try and consider the cultural context if you can, because there may be nuances if you're raised Jewish, or if you're raised Muslim or Hindu, from a religious context. Language, right? Some people revert back with dementia; they revert back to their mother tongue. Can they even understand you in English? Or I'm in Montreal in French, right? They don't have these language skills. So really, to the agencies that are coming in and providing an essential service, you need to get under the skin of the people that are around that loved one.
Yeah, I love that idea. I think it's hard though, and I think that is a challenge that we in our system face. Is we want to provide this care. In theory, this is the care we want to provide. In practice, it's economically cumbersome to do it. It is philosophically complicated to do it, and it's just overall challenging, right? Like, how do we ensure we're caring for this person in the way that's appropriate to them? If I don't necessarily know about it, how do I know if it's right? If we're talking about for South Asian context, whether it's Bangladesh, whether it's within India, whether it's Goa or uh, and Punjab, like we're talking, the context is so different. So it is so complicated, I think, in practice to deliver that and navigate that, that maybe some organizations say, you know, we're not going down this road. We'll do what we can. And if you don't like it, there you go.
So there's two things, if I can comment to that, Andrew. First
Sure.
of all, um, the care provider that you're hiring, whether you're hiring direct or through an agency, has to be someone who can work with compassion, who exudes compassion.
Okay.
And this comes to how you hire. Whether you as a family are hiring privately, or you're hiring through an agency, the agency needs to do the vetting to make sure they're bringing. You can train people to change a diaper, to feed, to cleanse, to do all of the chores that are required, that are needed at the stage that the loved one is at. You cannot teach compassion. You cannot teach how to treat people. Well, you can teach people how to treat people like humans, and this is the one thing we need to remember as we provide the care, right? So there's that aspect. Whether when it comes, and also if an organization is saying we're not going there, that's a red flag to me if I'm hiring you. Right? If you're not going to even try to understand, well, then maybe you're meant to be in an institutional setting where that's not important, right? Where it's deemed not important because there's other influences that come in. But if you're coming into a home, or you're coming into a residence, and you're providing the support, if you cannot get into any of the nuances we mentioned earlier, at least treat the person as you would wish to be treated, as a human
I would agree
being,
with that.
right? So if you keep that in mind, and I get it's not easy, right? I get that they're stretched. I get that they're underpaid. Um, but you've gone into this line of business for a reason. Keep that humanity there.
Yeah. One thing I hear is um, sometimes is that um, the organizations themselves are understaffed, and the employees are transactional. They're coming and going. So it's hard for the organization to necessarily work on developing these individuals and getting them trained up to understand some of this nuanced piece, especially if Susie one day is going to visit your mom, and then it's Jane tomorrow, and then it's Steve the next day. So it's hard to build that repository of knowledge, understanding of dignity, and um, to really make sure that person's cared for in the way they need. I totally agree with you. I think that dignity needs to be a part of that. I think that systematically it's complicated for these organizations to do it. So I'm not trying to, say that everything is great and roses, but in reality it's a complicated subject, and families need to be aware of that, that they may hire these organizations and individuals with the best intention, but they're only doing the best that they can with the resources that they have. So, like you said, find those organizations that are appropriate and right, that fit your family's beliefs and needs to the
I don't.
closest way possible.
Yeah, I don't actually think it's complicated. It just is not in the periphery of our thinking. Right? As soon as we bring it to the forefront, so a family member says, "My mother cannot be cleansed by a male," she will be incredibly uncomfortable with that. Now you've shared that, and now the agency can say, "Okay, I need to make sure I've got female care providers coming for your mother." These are
That one I would say is
once it,
simple.
it's
There's
say
other
that
ones that aren't as simple though.
correct. The other ones are not as simple, but I think if we don't even have it on the horizon of something to know, we don't think about it. But as soon as we start to teach the systems, because I think we as people need to teach the systems that this is important, ask the question, what is dignified dying to you or to your mother or to your father or to your spouse, right?
I'd
Let,
qualify dignified living rather than dignified dying, right? Let's try and
yes,
extend that
correct,
life.
correct. So whatever that you're right, whatever we've got left in that time, what should that look like? What is important to you? So it's asking that question, right? And I don't think the institutions ask it. People in the institutions, again, for all the reasons that we've said, that people are busy, they're stressed. Um, Again, how do you hire? We worked with 3 agencies while my mom and dad were at home. Um, I'm not saying they were without problems, but communicating with me resolved it. I would see things that are going on and I'd come back. We also didn't have, like, I think at the worst case, which was right at the beginning, we had 7 people in rotation, 7 or 8 people in rotation, which was a lot. It was a lot, and 3 agencies
Happens.
and private. Like, I was in a crisis mode and had to react, and I found it. So as we streamlined that down, I was still working with 2 agencies, and I streamlined it down further to 1 agency with 3 people in rotation. So you can move in that direction, and you just need to be aware of the implications of each time you make a change, because if the loved one's not participating in the choices being made, you're making choices for them. So
Totally. Versha, do let me introduce you to the audience right now, and then I want to unpack this a little more. Varsha Bhat is a business and innovation leader focused on aging, elder care, and the often invisible systems that shape caregiving into real life. With a career spanning growth, strategy, partnerships, and market expansion across North America and Europe, she brings a systems lens to one of society's most unique challenges, aging and elder care. Informed by lived caregiving experience, Varsha examines how policy, healthcare, and industry routinely fail families and what it will take to rebuild elder care as essential social and economic infrastructure. From both personal lived experiences and learnings from community, she is increasingly shining the light on the plight of cultural competency and care. Varsha is the creator and host of the Aging with Dignity podcast, a community service platform amplifying caregiving realities and older adult challenges to drive more honest conversations in our homes. She regularly speaks on aging, caregiver trust, and system design, and writes on elder care reform, cultural accountability, and innovation. Varsha, can you talk to us about, first off, how you got into the space? You alluded a little bit earlier on that your parents kind of led you down this direction. Can you talk about that?
sure. My journey didn't start as a caregiver. That wasn't a label I knew. I started as a daughter. My mother in 2019 was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and that was around November or December of 2019. We all know a couple of months later, we were all in lockdown. We were not given any information, not even a pamphlet of here's what to expect. So my father, just basically out of a sense of duty and love, stepped in and started picking up more and more things around the house that need to be done. I went into research mode, trying to figure out what is this thing called Alzheimer's. What do we need? What can we expect as a trajectory for my mother? So things started to open up, of course, as we know. And so I would do groceries and drop them off. I would be coming by periodically. There were moments that were beautiful too, that I would, you know, I come from an Indian family, and I saw my father at one point with my mother making these puris, which are round bread that you deep fry. So my mother could no longer roll. So my father was doing that, and my mother could do the a little bit of the frying. Another time I'd come in, my dad was making rotis, which are again bread, but it's roasted. And he made the dough from scratch, and he was, all the way through. I don't even do that anymore. I buy them right at the shop. So it was really beautiful to see this, that my father had taken on the things and tasks that my mother typically did, right? And they always shared things around the house. Dad always vacuumed, for example. But this became more and more falling onto my father's plate. Um, what if we then fast forward to 2024 August? My mother was reassessed. I learned from some other medical professionals that perhaps because she had had a stroke first, it might be vascular dementia, and there could be some treatment not to reverse it, but to slow it down and to help with some of the progression. We went to the neurologist, and um, she got re-diagnosed with a very rare form of dementia that's called corticobasal degeneration. Unfortunately, it presents like Alzheimer's as well as Parkinson's. So the loss of memory, of course, but the loss of motor skills. And I think actually in the end, it's the motor skills that was more prevalent in mom. And I've got several examples through her journey that really isolated that. But that was in August. A few weeks later, my father had a cardiac event that reduced him down to 30% of his heart. So I only live a mile and a half up the road, so I was here all the time. My sister's in Victoria, my brother's in outside of Quebec, and they were here, but then they had to go back to their homes, to their families, and I remained here. Um, in October, my father was at the hospital. That was just to check his medications, and they'd wanted to keep him overnight. Quite a traumatic event that happened there in terms of my father's reaction to being in the hospital. The doctor had told me, what are his end of life wishes. I really needed to decompress, so I walked away for about 10, 15 minutes. When I came back, my father was pulling all his EKG markers off, and I thought he was just confused. I'm like, Dad, we're waiting to get you admitted. He was like, no, no. And then in a clear moment, he just turned to me and went, what life is this here? And so he wanted to go home. That was abundantly clear. So when in October, when he got home, I realized when the doctor came to visit, she said, you should probably think about palliative care for your dad. And I was adamant, absolutely no. My father, I saw what he was like at the hospital, and my parents were medical professionals, so they understood that world. I said, there's no way I'm taking him into a palliative residence. So the doctor turned around and said, you could do palliative care at home, which I did not know, and I proceeded to learn. So we were able to set up palliative care for dad at home with the doctor's visits, the nurse's visits. That was October. By the end of November, dad had passed. Um, I had to pivot. Of course, my brother and sister, family, friends were all here. We had the funeral. My attention went into that. And then, of course, everybody leaves, and you end up with the quiet, like, the quiet after everyone is gone. I then had to pivot, and my mother was at this point in a hospital bed at home. She needed 24/7 care. I had already set that up for both my mom and dad, and then I was here. I was working full time as well. I have my own life, my own family obligations. So when I pivoted, it was now fully on my mother. What is her trajectory going to look like? Talking to the doctors and neurologists. Um, we ended up starting palliative care for her at home in April. And then in June, we cremate, so we did my father's ashes on Father's Day, and my sister, coming from Victoria, had seen the real decline in my mother and our mother, and said, "We need to start thinking about residence," which I was not ready for. Um, so then we started the conversation about palliative care, and we were very, very fortunate with a wonderful residence here in not too far from my parents in Montreal. And we got her on the Friday. I made the call, and on the Wednesday we had the room. So we were very fortunate. My mother was there for 7 weeks, just under 7 weeks, and then she passed there. So that was my complete journey, and there was learning from day one. Right, as I started to investigate what is this thing called Alzheimer's, right up until learning everything to do with palliative care and powers of attorney, and so people were reaching out to me asking, for advice. And I'm like, well, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, but I had the lived experience. And this was kind of a little the genesis to starting the podcast was people need this information. We shouldn't be having to go to the annals of, the universities, to find and research stuff. That should not be the way we go when we get such a diagnosis.
Growing up, did you have any experience around a dementia with your family?
We didn't even know the word. No,
Did you have
no.
any did you have any experience with memory decline or cognitive changes in elderly individuals around you?
No. So part of the issue for first generation immigrants is you don't have your parents here, right? So my parents immigrated to Canada, leaving their families behind, their parents and their siblings. Um, so this was one of the things that I recognized as well in my learning, that my parents, like most first generation immigrants, did, especially at that time, today might be different, don't get to see the aging of their own parents. They're abroad. My parents in our situation got a letter, a telegram, a phone call saying your father is sick or has passed. My parents' participation in that was to send money home to help defray some of the costs. What they couldn't do, my father was the sole earner. My mother was taking care of three of his kids. Could not get up and, first of all, it wasn't that easy to jump on a flight back in the late 60s, um, but could not just pick up and leave for months at a time. It's a little bit different today that we do have the capability of getting on a flight more easily. We have technology. People have cameras in homes, in their parents' homes, and can look in no matter where you are in the world. So you can have a little bit more visibility. But for the first generation that comes here, they don't see the aging of their parents. So they don't see the choices that are being made, and they don't see the options as well along the way. So they don't think about that for themselves, right? So we never had this conversation. My parents thought about us, but they thought about us for the future, so they had a will. But we never talked about, and we had a little bit of a conversation as they were in their 70s, don't want to be hooked up to machines. If it gets to that point, cut the cord. I remember my dad so clearly going, but don't give up too soon, right? So he had a good sense of humor about it too. But no, we never talked about cognitive decline. Dementia, the first time I heard the word dementia was probably, I'm going to say it was around 2007, 2008, with a colleague whose mother was diagnosed with dementia and still didn't really understand it, but had some sense of the decline and some of the experiences they were going through. So yeah, no, not something we ever talked about, not a word that we ever really understood.
What was the role like of your India community in Montreal? I assume you grew up in Montreal, right?
Yeah, Montreal.
So what was it like, the role of the India community in Montreal as you were going through this? Was it supportive? Did you think that having a cultural community close to you really helped reaffirm and support you? What was that like?
Yeah, that's it's very unique, I think, in some ways to my parents. Just to share, my mother got the Governor General's Award for her volunteering, from Canada. So you can imagine how active and vocal she was. My parents also started a school called Education and Human Values. It was free of charge for children from age 4, eventually to 24, 25. There was an adult section as well. Free of charge every weekend. They were doing multiple classes. So they had hundreds of students coming through this every year and graduating. Um, that was the extended family, the community. Um, I think so. If I go from 2019 to 2024, the community was dropping by, right? Friends found out that my father was managing with my mother, but realized that he's doing the cooking. They would come by with food, just natural expression of love and to try and help out. When it came to dad's decline, I think people were very shocked, including us, because we never expected that. We were sort of prepared that mom's time will come, but everybody expected that dad would continue after. So when dad suddenly had this coronary event, and when somebody had come to see my mom and found that my dad was in bed, um, that went through the community like wildfire. Um, the community was amazing. They were stepping forward for my parents out of love for my parents. But to be very honest, I was the recipient. I was here. I received a lot of that love in the form of food, in the form of chatting, in the form of support. So the community was very, very important, and it's one of the things that I'm reflecting on now as my parents have moved on, that we talk about the constraints in the system, the aging population, the need for more support. Even if we were to open immigration today and let in whatever number of care providers into this country, it's not going to be enough and it's not going to be in time. So, how do we as communities step forward and support people as we age? And so I'm digging in more and more into this concept of compassionate communities because of what I learned and what I lived and where I think we need to go. You know, grandchildren can come in and spend time with the grandparents, and that gives if it's with the grandfather, the grandmother has a little bit of a break, right? The children can come in and do the groceries. I'm even now offering to people when I go do groceries, I'm like, "Can I pick up some groceries for you?" And they kinda look at me going, "No, I can do my groceries." I'm like, "Okay," and then I'll ask again, and then I'll ask again. I'm like, "Can I pick up" It's hard to pick up our bags of milk, right? It's heavy. "Can I pick up some milk for you? I'm just gonna be doing my" So this is what we can do as a community, and there's so much that we can do that we don't think of it that way. So when you ask what was a community there for my parents or for me? Yes, and I think it was quite unique in terms of the volume of what that community meant. Um, and we're very fortunate for that. And I think we need to leverage that and do more of that for ourselves because we're all aging.
I think community is such an important piece that is oftentimes forgotten. I know that sometimes, we say this is an individual or a private family matter. We don't want to talk about it. With stigma perpetuates, like, we don't want to talk about it. The family knows it's happening, but we're not going to speak about it outside. So we never give room for community to come alongside and supporters come alongside and help us where we need it, to meet us where we are and to fill in the low points, really. And I think ultimately it's that stigma that pushes us away from that community concept. So what you're saying speaks to such a profound piece that is so hard, especially in a lot of minority communities. Um, First Nation communities are another one, right? Where dementia, again, like you said, was never a word that you used, was never a word in First Nation communities. And so they're starting to rationalize the idea that community needs to come alongside and support it. We'll work together to solve this thing. And I think community is so important. So how do you reconcile someone starts building that community? Because there's a level of vulnerability that they must go in to build that community, because really they have to go and say, "Hey, my loved one's going through this thing," and that's a vulnerable statement. You're opening yourself up. And some people say, "I don't want to do that." I know some people that say, I have too much pride for that. I don't want to, it looks bad on this person because they have stigma based. It looks bad on them, so it's going to look bad on me. And I've heard all these statements. I'm sure you have too. So how would you suggest that individuals start that conversation?
So I think there's a couple of arms here. I'll share from my father's perspective, who was very reserved, right? He was he just did what needed to be done. He picked up the pace on doing what needed to be done around the house. It was months later, I would say almost close to a year later, that he turned to me and said, "This understanding what your mom is going through has been really tough." He found solace and understanding through meditation, a group he was doing online because it was COVID. And he said, "I'm starting to get a better understanding." If you can think from his perspective, he was falling into the caregiver role with his spouse, who he was probably planning, like they were 87, 86, 80, 80, 80 early 80s when it all started. Um, you're looking towards, your remaining golden years, as they say, together, enjoying it together. Um, so all of a sudden, he's having to shift. My dad did not speak about this. He did not speak about what the toil was on him. He did not speak about the Alzheimer's with people, because my dad, again, is just a very reserved person. There were a few people that would come in, and then he would start to say, "Yes, she has Alzheimer's, so the memory, she's losing a bit of the memory." My mother would say it a little bit too, because my mother was walking with a walker, and her reflection was always on the physical, like what's happened to this body. So with close friends, they would have those conversations. I only realized the stigma later on when I started talking about it. I became before the podcast, as I think it was around just before the time Dad had his cardiac event, where I was just meeting more people. And of course, through the course of the last 18 months, I've realized that the stigma is a big, big part of it. And that's part of why I do these kinds of podcasts, or I go to forums and speak, because the more we can normalize this, the easier these taboos and stigmas can fall off the table, and we can have these frank discussions. So I think there's a role for society as a whole to come forward and embrace this. We don't, we used to call cancer the C word, and we would always whisper, right? Oh, she's got cancer. We don't. We're kind of doing that with Alzheimer's or dementia, forms of dementia. And I hope is that that needle shifts, right, from being something that's fearful to being in the doctor's office and getting information and saying, okay, what are my next steps? What do I do? That only happens when there's frank conversation. So it has to happen from within the medical system. It has to happen within I'm going to call it the industry of dementia. We need to be out there talking about this. And it has to happen at the community and family level. I go to local community groups and I speak very openly about the journey that we had to go through, the struggles that we went through. And it's amazing. I have been chased down 3 times, Andrew. 3 times I've been chased down in the mall, paying my taxes, doing groceries, by people that have said, Varsha, my mother, the two were mothers and one was a father, has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. What do I do? Now, why are you chasing? I don't, I'm honored that you're chasing me down, but they shouldn't have to chase me down, right? They should have that information from from the clinicians and doctors that they're working with. But I'm open to it, and I talk to them and I share what I can, because that's the only way we can get through support. And so that becomes the community. When you talk about the community, we all have our communities around us, whether it be the church that you go to, or the social clubs that you're part of, or your block, your neighborhood that you're in, or the building that you're in. This is your community. Now, parts of your community may be far. Your children are part of your community. They may not live near you. They may have gone to a different city, a different province, a different country. They're still part of your community, right? Keep the conversations going. And these are hard conversations to have on both sides, right? For the parents to speak about it, and for the children to suddenly go into a role reversal with their parents, right? To say, okay, I need to know now, how do I help you? Um, so I think that the communities need to grow, and there's multiple parts to how this happens.
Makes me wonder though, because you said you have two siblings, right?
Yes.
I hear sometimes that, publicly sharing these stories is complicated because maybe one of your siblings is like, yeah, let's normalize this thing. Let's talk about it. And some are like, no, we don't want to talk about it. We will deal with it exclusively in the family. So how do you navigate what is appropriate to talk about versus what's not? What is public available information that you can talk about your family versus what is private? Because it is so complicated. I've talked to lots of people on here, and one guy wrote a fiction book to navigate it, so it wasn't about his family. It was an allegory of it. And some say, you know what, I'm an only child, and we talked about it, my mom, and we're going all in. So how do you navigate that, considering you've got siblings as well that you have to balance?
Yeah. So just a little bit about the hierarchy. So I'm the eldest. And as I was starting to come upon this idea of the podcast, I did reach out to them. And I said, would you like to participate? Would you like to? They've both declined. They do not want to be. The first episode, the first season, I talk a lot about my journey with my parents. So on the first episode, I'm trying to remember, it might have been before or after recording the first episode, I went to them and said, how involved you want to be. And I'm respecting their choices, so I do not mention their names. I'm open that I have two siblings, because that's about me, but I'm talking about my journey with my parents. I reflect on my parents' shared reflections, but I will never talk about my brother or my sister's reflections, because that's theirs. I can only speak about it for myself. So, and it's you raise a good point because again, it's partly stigma, but it's also just the way some people are. Some people just don't want to talk about their personal stuff, and we need to respect that.
It
So
could also be, Versha, that the individual, they may say, that both parents have passed, they may say, yeah, but that's too far. That is something we shouldn't be talking about. Um, that is something we should have. So I think that's maybe the not necessarily the stories of your experiences. You said it's a protection of their identity, protection of who they are, protection of what continues to honor them. So how do you navigate that then? Because that's not necessarily a story piece. That's a direct tie to your parents.
so I didn't have that problem with them. Neither of them
Mm.
came back and said, "Don't do it," or they're not involved in it at all. I don't even know if they watched the podcasts. Um, but I never had either of them say, "Don't do this. I don't approve," or any of that. They never went that far. They see it as my thing, and maybe this was my way of coping too, right? So they were, yeah, they were supportive in that sense. They didn't actually clamp down. And I think if someone's in that situation where they want to talk about it, but they're not getting support from their siblings or their family, you've got to at least have the conversation to identify what the boundaries are. And it cannot be prescriptive. It cannot be that every family is going to operate the same way. It also cannot be um, if I was telling my sister that you cannot do this because she is her own person too, right? I can't dictate to her what she can and cannot do. Um, but I can put some boundaries. Please don't mention my name. Please, I don't want to be on social media. Please don't talk about this aspect of whatever. So you can put those boundaries there, and I think that's the important conversation to have, so that you can be respectful of each other.
One thing, Versha, you mentioned earlier on, I think is important was the fact that when your mom became, or your mom was harder for your mom to do certain tasks, your dad stepped in and started covering that role. It may have been an unspoken thing. He just, just did it out of love. But I find in um, some specific cultures, you have male roles and female roles, and they're so defined, and sometimes blurring them is hard. And I believe it's like that in India culture as well, right? Where you have male roles and female roles. So what was that like, the blending where your dad was starting to take out some of these roles that was outside of the norm?
So I think my parents were atypical from what you've just described. If you understand the South Asian community norms, if you will, my parents never had an arranged marriage; they had a love marriage. Right? They met each other, fell in love, and got married. Um, my Both of them were professionals, medical technologists, worked in the hospital, so educated. Um, I don't know. I just always remember my father did the vacuuming. That was his thing, right? So that's part of the house things. Um, uh, d- an example, when my father would be out before we had a snowblower or a contract to clear the snow, my dad would go out and start shoveling. And we were three kids. And if we were sitting around watching TV or something, my mother would be all over us. What do you think? Your dad has to do that on his own. So we're all out there shoveling with him. So there was always you don't just sit back and do only your thing. And my parents lived that. So watching my dad starting to I remember him cooking even when we were young, but it was largely my mother who did it. Um, so yeah, so watching my father step in, it brought smiles to my face, and it wasn't smiles as in, "Oh my God, Dad, I can't believe you're doing that." It was just a recognition of the love. He wasn't doing it from a sense of duty. He could have ordered the food in every day, right? He chose not to. He said, "We like this, so I'm going to make it fresh." And then, of course, like I said, the community was coming with food, and yeah. So yeah.
How has that impacted you? Like, thinking about that relationship between your parents and the ideas and the beliefs and the philosophies that they had, how has that impacted and transformed your life over the time?
That's a big part of who I am as a result, right? Just the concept of caring. A lot of people have pointed out to me that with the podcast, it's a community outreach podcast. The public speaking that I do is again to communities. I just yesterday bumped into somebody and she said, "Versha, you're doing this. It's wonderful. You're giving back." And then she just herself reflected and said, "But you come from your parents who have given so much to this community over 50 plus years." I've had that said to me so many times, and I don't feel I'm anywhere near where my parents what they were doing. But it's the small part that I'm carrying forward, and I do think about them, and that giving back is such an integral part of who I am today. Comes from watching them and seeing what they've done, and the sacrifices that they've made along the way. The other side that opened my eyes was watching my dad with my mom over the last 7, 8 years, and I realized not everyone can do that. Not everyone can do that, and those who can do it, let's acknowledge it because I don't think we do. Right? There are those people who step up and are able to care for a loved one. When I see my father, because people have said to me, "Oh, men don't do that, right? Men are not caregivers, and it's really hard for men." And you mentioned men coming from an Indian background. You've got, the roles. My father broke those molds, right? So I look at my life when people say that, and I'm like, yeah, but I had a role model that defies all of what you're saying. Men can do it. My father was 87 years old, cooking and cleaning for my mom, right? So he insisted. I remember I was here, my sister was here, and my mother had to go to the washroom, and she was with the walker. And I'm like, "I'll take her, Dad." No, it was adamant that he was going to do it. My sister was staying here for a few weeks, adamant that he would take my mom. Um, and the first time that happened, you have to think about the loss of dignity, right? Of having to have your bum wiped by your partner, by your spouse. Or being the husband who's doing it to the wife. These are not normal things that we encounter with our loved ones. We do it for our children because it's understood they're helpless. We're living much longer now. Um, and not always in the best ways. So these things come up. So yeah, I think how has it affected me? It's integral to who I am.
What do you think your parents would say if they could see what you're doing now?
Hope they'd be happy. I'm sorry. Um, I hope that they would be proud. Um, sorry. They did so much for children. I'm now looking at the other end. Yeah, I hope they'd be proud that I'm taking something that was so hard, um, and so much learning and, trying to rechannel it into something that's positive and that can give back. I'm so sorry.
Don't be sorry. I think you're
Sorry. Yeah. So, I've built a studio in their basement. This is the studio. So it's a little tribute to them, right? Like, let me use their space in their honor. The feedback I get from the community in many ways, I think or I'm taking it this way, that it's being channeled from my parents. Right? The thank yous and you're making, when people listen or watch an episode and they come back to me and they said, I've been trying to get my mother to do her will. And a friend sent her an episode of your podcast, and she called me and said, "We have to talk." That warms my heart. That's what this is all about, right? This is why we talk. This is why you do the podcast, so that we have these conversations, and that's important. Sorry. Oh, mom.
don't be sorry. Don't be sorry. And I think there's such impact, especially to your podcast being launched to, support your community, to honor your parents, to try and make a systematic change for others. And the fact that's in your parents' basement, I think, says a lot, right? It is probably it feels better to do it in there. It feels like they're involved and
Yeah,
an active contributor almost.
yeah,
So, shifting a little bit here, your professional background, exists on multiple continents and doing lots of different things. How has that impacted you in being able to effectively be a system changer in aging?
Yeah, so my background was really coming from a tech background, not as a developer, but really commercializing software businesses. So I've done that a few times where I've had the president CEO T-shirt. My last engagement was really trying to drop some of that behind me, and I was leading partnership development globally. I stopped working the day mom went into palliative care and fully thought that actually didn't even think about what would happen after. Just was going through day to day being there. But as the podcast got launched and as I started meeting people and hearing not only from the clinicians with all the developments that are taking place, but also the families and what they're clamoring for. Um, I realized I actually heard it from other people. People were telling me, "Varsha, you're so passionate." I would be sad one second talking about my mom and dad, and the next moment, if I talked about aging with dignity, or if I talked about some of the conferences that I was speaking at or attending, my face would just light up. My face, everything would change about me, is what I was told. So they're like, "First, you have so much passion about this space." So I thought, you know what? As I started to come out of, mom passed in August of last year, so um, as I started to shift into my career again, I've decided to pivot. I think there's a lot of the skills that are transferable, but there's so much to be done in this space. So there's a couple of hats that I'm wearing here in this space right now. What really resonates with me are the aging in place technologies. Right, it leverages my understanding of technologies and commercializing those businesses, with the fact that, like my parents, they wanted to stay in their home. Right? We looked at condos, we looked at residences, and they came back and they said respectfully, "We want to stay in our home." So what did we need to do? What did we need to bring in to make that a safe, comfortable environment for them? Um, that's one aspect of it. There's another aspect of it that's around the palliative side. I saw what palliative residences did for my mother and for me and the family. We need more of that. So, I'm I guess, an ambassador in some way for that. Uh, the other thing is I sit on the board. I'm vice chair of the Montreal Alzheimer Society. So we're pushing the envelope there. We have a think tank within there where we're pushing the envelope on everything to do with Alzheimer's. So I'm still figuring out or defining what my career trajectory is looking like. It's only been a few short months that I've been going down this route, but I know this is where I want to go. I just need to figure out how it's going to be defined. There's so many areas where there's a need, and I think I can help. I'm doing a lot of volunteering with organizations as well, um, which is again about me giving back, and I'm perfectly fine about that. But I will need to figure out how do I pivot this into a career where I can manage both. Right, where I'm continuing to give back, but also taking care of my obligations.
And it's so interesting, Versha, to hear um, individuals like yourself and myself that have been through this journey, and that's what leads us into this space. It oftentimes isn't something, at least for me, I would have planned or picked or chosen, but because we've been through it, we've seen the results, and now we think it can be done better. So how can we actively be a contributor to make that change? And I think that's what is helping break dementia stigma so quickly, is the folks really like yourself that are coming from this other background, and now I'm redeploying everything I have, everything that is me, into this area to make a massive impact, to be a catalyst for change in this domain. And I think that leads such a profound place for change to happen.
And I think also at this stage of my life, speaking just for myself, not um, I want to leave with a purpose. I want to live with purpose, and I want to leave behind my thumbprint on that purpose. Right. So this is what I've chosen. I mean, there's so many other areas we could go into, but Alzheimer's touched our family very closely. Um, the the ability to make a change also. So it's not just something that I'm dreaming about. It's something that I actually understand, and want to expand on that.
Well, first shot, you ready for a lightning round?
Sure.
All righty. Uh, so, first question, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Calf or decaf?
Full calf.
I haven't had one decaf person on here other than me. That's unfortunate.
Oh, no, that's what I got going on here.
Big cup too.
Yeah,
Morning person or night owl?
night owl.
Don't like the mornings, eh?
People have said to me, Versha, don't you love to see the sunrise? And I said, yes, I do. I just don't wake up for it. I stay up for it.
What's one word in caregiving you wish would disappear?
Stigma.
What's one word caregivers should use more?
Self-love. Self-love.
How do you define self-love?
Caring for yourself. Caregivers, these are the family members who are caring for their loved ones, um, put everything aside on their own, their health, their mental health, their food, like everything is cast aside for their loved one. And that's why respite is so important. Taking that mental break, filling your cup so you can be there for them.
What's one sign of burnout you wish people didn't ignore?
Sleep, whether it be too much or too little.
If they were to make a movie about your life and your family's life through this journey, who would play you and your parents?
No idea. Good, compassionate people. Um, Gosh, I have no idea.
Never thought about this one, eh?
My father, pardon me?
You never thought about this one.
No, I've never considered that. My father was, many people have reflected on him as like, oh, he was a saint. If you had, I wish you could have met him. He exuded a lot of that in his persona. I have seen my father angry, not even 5 times in my life. Unfortunately, during his palliative couple of weeks, it was 5 or 6 times a day because of the frustration that he was going through and everything. Uh, so that was my father, right? Somebody who I'd never seen angry. My mother was the opposite in many ways, not necessarily in terms of anger, but passion, right? Like and compassion. My mother started to give back when she was in Montreal, and saw a homeless person, and she came back and said, "I didn't know we had homeless people in Montreal. I thought this is a rich country. I thought they're all in India." So she would send money back to India for the homeless, and that's when she started here. And she did everything with the Labor House and Welcome Mission and Okay Bono and all the soup kitchens, if you will. And that's why she got that Governor General's Award for all of the giving that she did when she realized we need. She goes, I remember her line. She said, "This country has given me a life with my husband. My 3 children were born here. They've been educated here. They have lives and jobs here. This country has given me everything I need to give back." And so if someone could embrace that when they're playing my mother, that would be important.
What food reminds you of your childhood?
Um, a few. Every Saturday we would do groceries, so it was the McDonald's visit. While we did our groceries, then we'd get to go to McDonald's. That's when I was quite young. But there are Indian foods that are comfort foods for me still, right? And there's foods that I always loved, and then there was rivalry and with the siblings. Like, I don't like that one, I like this one. And so whenever I was the oldest and I went away, I went to Waterloo for my undergrad. So every time I'd come back, my mother would make my favorites. And then my sister would be grumbling because my mom would like, "Oh, you all love this." And she's like, "No, only she loves this." So, there are certain foods that, Indian foods that my mother used to make.
What's one habit that makes care harder than it needs to be?
Trying to do it all on their own.
What's one small thing that helps people more than you expect?
Compassion. Doesn't cost anything.
What show or movie helps you reset after a hard day?
I love a lot of the medical dramas.
There's so
So,
many of them.
I know. Well, I've just finished The Resident, and I missed out on, Grey's Anatomy, so I'm indulging in Grey's Anatomy of going backwards. And I've heard about The Pit, so that's gonna be next on the horizon. I don't know why. I don't know why. A lot of
But
them have me in
doesn't that
tears.
turn you into hypochondriac? Like, I've seen House. I've seen all these things, and that means I'm
House
now
was great.
identifying that I have lupus or whatever. Like,
No, it
doesn't that
doesn't for
make you
me.
think that?
I'm not a hypochondriac at all. They do I do break down in tears on many episodes. Um, but it's uplifting too to know that there are solutions. And you mentioned House, that was a great one too. I binged on that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't yeah, I don't find it makes me into any sort of hypochondriac. A little bit more aware. Sometimes I'm learning things going, oh, wait a minute, I watched that on if somebody mentions that they have something. But it's entertainment.
What do you think caregivers overthink the most?
Doing everything right.
What do you think caregivers underestimate the most?
Doing everything right. It takes far too much. You have to do everything for right now. Your decisions are going to be imperfect. So accept that, make the best decision for the circumstances at this time with the information you have, and then accept that it may be wrong.
What does dignity mean to you in one word?
Respect.
What's your favorite smell from your childhood?
Cut grass.
I recognize the smell, but I hadn't had that one before on this.
It's just one that I don't know. I just you asked, it came. I'm not allowed to
Huh,
think
all
about these
right.
answers.
That's good. That's you got it right. You don't have to think.
It's not dirty
Uh,
diapers.
let's go with cut grass. What's one hobby or interest you'd love to return to?
Music.
What kind of
Playing a musical instrument. I'm hoping to put that on my bucket list in the next few months.
what instrument do you play?
As a child, I had played the flute. I had wanted to pick up the flute again, and I had mentioned it to my dad, and I just never got around to it. So it's now a toss between the flute or this instrument I've only found out about during COVID, and there's some amazing musicians. It's called a hand drum. It's like an inverted bowl with indentations on it. It's a steel drum. It's kind of like a steel drum, I guess, but it has such a beautiful sound. So there's not many people that teach it in Montreal. So those are the two that I'm actually considering.
Is it a portable instrument, like really portable? Because a flute is obviously easy
Yeah,
to
the
get
hand
around,
drum, I
but
mean,
no
I guess
places.
it must come with a case. It's probably about the size of a large mixing bowl inverted. It's
Oh,
hollow on the inside, so
huh. Interesting. I learned lots of random things on this show.
it's good though.
Oh yeah. Uh, what keeps you doing this work?
When I hear that a family feels that they've been helped, I feel like I'm doing my job, knowing I'm making a difference.
What's one thing you'll never stop being curious about?
What's next in life?
What
What's
gives you
next?
hope right now?
I'm very blessed. I'm very blessed by my friends and my circle. And there's this journey over the last 2 years, 18 months. Um, there's been so much positive and so much negative. We've not gone into that here. But my friends that are my longtime friends that I didn't even realize I needed were there for me, uplifting me. I'm making new friends. I shouldn't even be able to call them friends because they're so fresh, but some of them have been there for me like a rock, and I've just met them like a matter of months. I'm blessed in that sense, and that's what keeps me going.
What's the most human thing that's happened to you lately?
That's interesting. The most human thing. I mean, life is human. Um, I just okay, I'll share this one. I just came from a retreat, a ladies' retreat this past weekend, which the way I shared my reflection on it was I thought it was gonna be a holistic, HOLISTIC, a holistic retreat with, meditation and breathing and yoga and it was that, but it was more. It was about, um, charting your vision board, learning what your non-negotiables are in life, doing Zumba dance, lots of food. It wasn't the plain vegetarian food that I thought we would have. It was a gamut of food. A lot of alcohol. Like it was really, and I came away saying it was not holistic, HOL, it was holistic, WHOL. And that was very life affirming for me. It was with a group of women I have never met. Um, the first day and a half was, I think we were 17 or 18, and then another 10 showed up. So we were 28 by the end of it. And uh, how can so many women from such diverse backgrounds, um, interests, and professions come together and yet have a common thread? That was very life affirming to me. Long answer to a speed round. Sorry.
Hmm, that's all right. Uh, I always give the guest the opportunity to have the last word for the audience. So, what would you have to say?
Oh, so if you're a clinician, if you're in this industry, keep pushing the envelope, please. We need answers. And share those answers. Don't keep them in the halls of academia. Get it out there. If you're a caregiver that is providing care to a loved one, reach out, build your community, build your support system. You don't need to do this alone. Find those moments of connection with your loved one because that's what's going to keep you going. And then for the older adults that are dealing with all of this, I think if you can do one thing for the people that are caring for you is acknowledge it. When my dad mentioned something and I just felt seen. It's not like we need the pats on the back or the accolades when you walk into a room. Um, but knowing that they see you makes such a difference. So if you are an older adult that has a caregiver, in whatever way that you want to, just express it to them because it will go a long way.
Varsha, well, thank you for joining us. It was a pleasure hearing about your journey into caregiving and the impact that you're making at advocacy. So, I know the audience is going to enjoy it. But so, thank you so much for joining us.
Andrew, thank you not only for having me here, but for everything you're doing with this podcast. It's wonderful. You're breaking the barriers here. And this is important. We need more of this going on. So thank you for what you're doing. And thank you for having me on as well. Appreciate it.
Of course, my pleasure. And to our listeners, thank you as well for being here and joining us. If today's conversation resonated with you, make sure to follow the Dementia Collective wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to like, share, and comment on this episode because that will help it get in front of more folks. And if you'd like to help us grow this movement, please consider becoming a member of the Village on Patreon. Among the benefits, like the ability to ask the guests questions, you'll get early access to every episode, plus the satisfaction of helping powerful voices like Varsha's reach more caregivers around the world. And finally, if you're on your own caregiving journey, remember, you are not alone. We're here at BlueBell to help connect you with the supports and resources that truly fit your family's unique needs. Until next time, remember, you are strong, you are not alone, and you are doing something that matters more than you know. Until next time.